We're on chapter 5, my grandparents. I knew 7 of my grandparents. My great-grandfather, Edson Duvall Stannard, my great-grandmother, Marion Carson Stannard, the third wife, my paternal grandfather, Lawrence William Stannard, my paternal grandmother, Pauline Inez Cole Stannard, which was his second wife, my paternal grandmother, Ethel Marie Buxton, my maternal grandfather, Raymond Seymour Potter, and my maternal grandmother, Clella May Cleveland. Edson Duvall Stannard and Marion G. Carson Stannard, my great-grandparents. And it looks like there's going to be a section on each of these people here. So we've got Edson Duvall Stannard, lived to be 97 years old. His wife, Mattie Briggs, died fairly young in 1931 at 56 years old. They had 7 children. 3 years later, he married Jessie M. Kittle. They were married nearly 11 years when she died in 1945. By 6 months later, he'd married Marion G. Carson, who was 28 years younger than Grandpa and outlived him by 16 years. And she's the great-grandmother that I knew. And here is a great picture of great-grandpa Stannard. And let's look at great-grandpa's business right there. Great-grandpa and grandma lived on South Main Street and spent a lot of their senior years rocking on the front porch during the good weather. It was always fun to wave at them on our way home since we had to drive right by them as we drove the 7 miles out of town to our house. Great-grandpa had some good stories to tell, and the one I remember best was the one about seeing the autopsy of a man in Florida who died from smoking. He described the lungs to us as my dad sat next to him in Grandpa's living room, puffing and blowing smoke all over. I could see Grandpa doing that. I think Grandpa was trying to make a point with Dad, but it didn't work. Dad had heard this story many times. Great-grandma, who we don't have a picture of, was a school librarian when Grandpa married her. She was a little stocky and wore her hair very short and with little spit curls around her forehead. She had a mad crush on my grandfather, but he married someone else. When she finally married his father, her statement was, "Well, I couldn't get the son, so I took the father." All right, sounds like a good movie. Every year the town had a Memorial Day parade. Ginny and I were Ginny and I were brownies, which were little Girl Scouts, and all the brownies and Girl Scouts walked in the parade. We craned our necks as we walked down Main Street, looking for my parents on the sidewalk, just so we could wave at them. At the end of the route, each girl could get an ice cream cone at the Elmhurst Dairy Store. My great-grandparents lived across from the store, so we always stopped to visit them for a few awkward minutes while we waited for our parents to pick us up. Lawrence William Stannard, Sr., whose first wife was Ethel Marie Buxton, second wife, Pauline Inez Cole Stannard, my grandparents. Lawrence William Stannard married my grandmother, Ethel Marie Buxton, in 1918. She was 22 and he was 20. My dad was born in 1920 and was named Lawrence William Stannard, Jr. Grandpa's name was carried for 4 generations. Grandpa and Grandma separated a couple years after my dad was born. Today, Grandma could get help for her emotional outbursts and screaming, violent tantrums. Fortunately, a loving father knows and judges those trials. Grandma took my dad and moved to Denver, where her parents lived. Her father was a well-known Episcopal minister throughout the United States. Grandma's traveled around a little, playing the piano by ear for melodrama productions. She was an excellent pianist. Grandma remarried in 1927 to Raymond Edward Brown and had another child, my Aunt Gladys. After several years, Raymond left and Grandma and Gladys moved to San Francisco. Grandma Brown lived in San Francisco on Green Street while I was growing up, so I had almost no contact with her. Dad called her often, back when the rates were $1 for 3 minutes. The calls were always short and sweet. Grandma always sent a family Christmas card along with a large box of See's chocolates. Whenever she wrote letters to sent cards, she always signed them lovingly Mother, or lovingly Grandma Brown, as the case may be. I met her when I was 8 years old and again as a 17-year-old. She wrote to my sister Lori often, so I thought if I'd write to her, she would write back. I tried it a couple times, but received no letters in return. Once I was satisfied Lori must be her favorite, I didn't send any more letters. A picture of Grandma Ethel Marie Buxton Stannard Brown. That is quite a name. Grandma Brown moved in with her daughter Gladys when she was older and lived out her life in Walnut Creek, California. In Gladys's house, it was a beautiful upright piano. It was my grandmother's. Grandma could play by ear and spent many hours on that piano. I wanted to buy it and bring it to her, but when I tried to contact Gladys, and bring it here, but I tried to contact Gladys, she was under home health care and couldn't be disturbed. Grandma Brown liked to embroider and embroidered many lovely pillowcases. I still have a doll that Corky made me from one of her pillowcases, and here's a picture of that doll. Grandpa Stannard spent many years in the Navy, from the 1920s up through World War II. He was an electrician in the Navy and owned his own business in Wellsville, Stannard Electric. My dad went to work for him after the war for a while. Grandpa was one of the best, if not the best, electricians in town. He was slender and tall, with a dimple on his chin. He also had dark, very curly hair. Both Grandpa and Grandma spoke so politely to me. I felt pretty special when I visited them. Grandpa always had a bowl of M&Ms on the table next to his living room chair. When I visited, he always offered me one. That's one, as in the number 1. I graciously and cautiously selected my one M&M, a great treat since we seldom had candy in our home. Grandpa once gave me a little cross necklace with a tiny diamond in the center. When I was in my early 30s, the cross disappeared. I wish I knew what happened to it because it meant so much to me. There's a picture of Grandpa Lawrence William Stannard from 1920. Grandpa was also a fly fisherman and had a freezer full of fish. He was good. The Genesee River, where he fished, flowed in front of our house in the country. So I'd see Grandpa often fly fishing at the bend in the river. Of course, that was a big deal to me, as I'd shout and wave at him, interrupting his fishing. That had to be annoying. Now I realize the importance of these fishermen having absolute quiet as they fish. After I left home, Grandpa suffered an aneurysm while fishing and was found at the edge of the river with a pole lying next to him. I still have one of his fishing poles hanging in my office. I'm not sure that I ever knew where that fishing pole came from. That's kind of cool. Grandma Pauline, no picture of her, Grandpa Stannard's wife, was the only grandmother I think of when I think of my grandfather. She's the one that I knew. Because she was Grandpa's second wife, we always called her Grandma Pauline instead of a more proper Grandma Stannard. She was petite with light brown curly hair, the curly hair older women always wore back in their day. She was very prim and proper. Her hair was always perfect, and she always sat very straight in her chair, which makes me want to sit straighter. She once had a beautiful silky knitting bag that was full of different sizes of knitting needles, and when she found out my love for knitting, she gave the colorful striped bag to me. I had that bag for years and with her needles in it, and loved it because she gave it to me. It disappeared in one of my many moves. Grandpa and Grandma Stannard lived 4 houses down the street from us when we lived in town. They lived in a 3-story red house that Grandma Pauline was raised in. We seldom visited them unless we were invited. We had dinner there once and occasionally sat with them in their living room while Dad talked to them. They spent hours watching television and loved their shows so much they wouldn't turn off the TV when we came visiting. Every day my siblings and I walked to the swimming pool several blocks down the street from us. Just before we turned into the parking lot for the pool, I'd check the little bar that was located there to see if Grandpa was in it. Invariably, he was sitting at the table with someone having a drink. I didn't really think much of it because I just liked seeing him and waving at him. But every day, Mom asked if we had seen Grandpa that day. Just checking up on him, I guess. Grandma Pauline had a large oval picture in her living room of a boy with light curly hair and a glow around him. I asked her once who the boy was, and she sort of beat around the bush and wouldn't tell me his name. Since then, I have seen a picture of that very same boy. is a depiction of the Savior as a little boy. I don't understand why she wouldn't tell me it was Jesus. Here's a picture of that. I visited Grandpa and Grandma Stannard when I was in my early 20s and lived out west. Before I left him, Grandpa gave me a kiss on my lips. Yes, my lips. And told me I'd given him a lot to think about. I've always wondered what he meant by that. There is a picture of several generations. It says Lawrence William Stannard Jr., Lawrence William Stannard the Fourth, Lawrence William Stannard Sr., and Lawrence William Stannard the Third, all there. Okay, Raymond Seymour Potter and Clella May Cleveland Potter, my grandparents. Grandpa Potter married Clella May Cleveland, a local girl from Allentown, when he was 23 and she was 21. Grandma Potter was an absolute beauty, and Grandpa was extremely handsome. What a good-looking couple they made. They were the parents of 5 children. Grandpa and Grandma Potter lived at 54 Oak Street in Wellsville. It's the house my mother was mostly raised in. It was a tall 3-story home with a dirt cellar. Grandma Potter was a meticulous homemaker and an excellent cook. She had a huge yearly rummage sale where she washed, ironed, and hung up every piece of clothing she sold. Neighbors bought their goods for Grandma to sell, or brought their goods for Grandma to sell. But first she had to sew any tears and replace any missing buttons, and then properly clean and press them. Every single dress, blouse, skirt, pair of slacks, or jacket was hung on a hanger that was hung on a rack. A rummage sale was an event people throughout the town looked forward to every year. No one would want to miss Clella Potter's rummage sale. Grandma was just a nice person with such a lovely home. I visited her once on June 25th, 1955. How do you remember those details? When I was the flower girl for my cousin's wedding. Grandma made me a beautiful long white dress to wear. I can still see her standing on her encased front porch as she had put the dress on me. Oh, hold on a second. Let me start over. I can still see her standing on her enclosed front porch as she had me put the dress on before I left for church. She had a pretty little pearl necklace and bracelet set for me. Grandma cooked and cleaned and canned, and then did it again. She always wore a house dress and was very proper. She was a tall lady, maybe 5 feet 9 inches. I walked down the steep steps into her dank, musty dirt basement with her once scary. It was filled with jars of food she canned. I went into that cellar only once. It was so creepy to me, I never wanted to go down there again. Grandma also did a lot of needlework. A few years after she died, Grandpa let me go through the dressers she had in the attic. I found a couple pieces of her needlework, one that was not completed. Grandpa let me take them, and I figured out how she did the needlework and completed the one. I still have the piece. Grandma died of cancer when she was 70, much too young. I was 12, so I remember her death well. Hers was the first viewing I ever attended, and I cried and cried. My grandfather took me under his wing and sat with me all evening, introducing me to all his friends. Grandpa Potter had been in the oil business for many years, and he worked in the oil fields, so his grimy, oily clothes gave Grandma a lot of extra work. He eventually started his own evacuation business when my uncle was ready. Uncle Punk, whose name was Vernon, joined Grandpa to form R.S. Potter and Son. I remember Uncle Punk. And Aunt Tootie, that's what it was. Grandpa was kind and gentle, but mostly he was honest. Everyone trusted and respected Ray Potter. He was a good man, my grandfather was. My mother couldn't speak highly enough of him. He visited often and was always welcome. When I graduated from high school, Grandpa Potter told me I was the only person he wanted to get a gift for. But I know he had no idea what to get, and he was very frugal with his money. So Grandma had been gone about 6 years by then. Grandpa went to the hospital every night while Grandma was sick with cancer. That was back in the day when everyone died in the hospital, not at home. The one night his children talked him into staying home was the night my grandmother died. He was so sad. Here's a picture of Grandpa and Grandma Potter. I visited Grandpa often as a teenager and stayed in his attic bedroom. It was the same bedroom my mother lived in after my dad went into World War II. Grandpa fixed it up for her and her 2 children. After we joined the church, Grandpa allowed the missionaries to live in his house, and we met in his living room and parlor for our Sunday meetings. Opening the living room and parlor into one big room made a nice chapel area for the little branch to meet in. He was old and fragile at the time and never expressed any interest in the church itself, but he was so giving and knew we needed a place to meet. He sat in his little study watching television while services were going on. On top of his television were very handsome pictures of himself and Grandma as much younger people. He always kept her nearby. One time for a family home evening, I was sharing memories with my children and of my grandfather, including a picture of him on the ground cleaning a rug with a rug beater. Suddenly, I was overcome with a deep, warm burning in my heart. And I knew my grandfather was there with us, listening as I expressed my love and admiration for him. I absolutely know, without doubt, he has accepted the gospel. That's it for the chapter.